We're back to Neil Haley Show. My guest today is Dr. Jack Rocco, and he's going to talk about why he became an author, but we're going to kind of go back to why he became a doctor first. So, Dr. Jack, thanks for stopping by. What made you want to get in this profession, especially being a surgeon, too? That's pretty impressive.
Oh, well, I would say that well, thank you, but thanks for having me as well. But I attribute a lot of the my profession into the influence of my grandfather early on. I grew up blue collar, Erie guy, Erie, Pennsylvania, and my grandfather was an old time Italian guy, immigrated from Italy, and he used to build grandfather clocks in his basement. And I swear to God, and I would help him with the grandfather clocks. And, I always attributed that to I loved working with my hands and building things and thinking in 3D. But I also I was good in school. I enjoyed science and math and did well in school. Went to Pitt for undergrad, then was accepted to medical school, just following that science thread. And then once I was in medical school, there weren't any of the other doctors in my family. Was the first to college, first in medical school, and went in with an open mind. What kind of doctor was I going to be? And I played sports, played football, and wrestled a little bit. And orthopedics was the thing that I was most attracted to. Treating sports injuries. But also, like I said, thinking in 3D, fixing things, hammers, chisels, saw, all those things I grew up with, really attracted me. And kind of a weird way to get about it, but I can't negate his influence on those decisions, later in life, and was very, very, very happy with it.
Were you ever a fan of Dr. Freddie Fu? If you were an orthopedic surgeon, he operated on me.
Oh yeah, I mean I rotated through Pitt's program. His partner Chris Harner fixed my ACL, and I think that also Harner was just starting with Fu. They were partners. It was like '87 when I had my ACL surgery, and then later ended up rotating with Harner and got to meet Freddie Fu firsthand in both the OR and the office. He was just so smart, amazing guy, so smart and so full of energy. Just great guy.
Yeah, I think I got my bone spurs removed arthroscopic after playing at Western Maryland College, playing college basketball there the first year, which is now called McDaniel College, in 1992. So I think I got it removed in 93. So yeah, that's when I got my surgery. So I remember those days, but went to Fu and, but then what happens when you have those arthroscopic surgeries, and I think you see it a lot of times, is that it becomes something that ends up nagging people the older they get. So they got always got to take care of themselves.
Yeah, life goes on, I've had, at this point I've had 3 surgeries on my knee, I had my ACL, and then I was stiff afterwards. So Harner, had to go in and shave some more things out and manipulate me and, break up the scar tissue. And then probably when I was in my 40s, time catches up to you. And, so like I was like that guy on the hair club. Not only was I was a patient, and then I bought then I bought the company. It's like I had the bad knees, and then I became an orthopedic surgeon. So
yeah, go fit and that thing. So why the book? Why did you write a book?
Yeah, the book, I talk about it in the book. It started off as my therapy, and I think guys handle things differently, you know. And I didn't know if I needed therapy. I didn't want to talk to a therapist. I don't know. I'm one of those guys. I would go to a therapist and I would try to tell them what it is I thought they wanted me to say, or try and analyze myself. So, I went through a separation and divorce, and, found myself down in North Carolina and just trying to figure stuff out. And, so I started journaling and I started writing stories, and just kind of really for myself, but, to figure it out. Like I said, I didn't want to go to therapy. I didn't know where to start with a therapist. So I just started, like, you get divorced, you get separated, you just start thinking,
Well, that's where you get your transition. Is I got through a separation and divorce just a short time ago, and I was in Dallas for a couple of years, then came back to Pittsburgh, and I've really, learned a lot about myself. And it's funny, once I came back to Pittsburgh is when really my transformation came to really identify some of the areas that I needed to improve.
Yeah.
I wasn't during the separation. Somehow we get in this mode where we're constantly in this kind of fight or flight. And then
Hmm.
I really used self hypnosis and things like that to cure a lot of the pain that you go through in a process like that.
Yeah, and I treat guys all day long, and have, I was in the service and I have guys come in to me, and these are guys that, they were in charge of 300 men in the military. They were
Right.
kicking ass and taking no prisoners. And, then they get out of the service and it's like, we got a nice job for you working at the Walmart distribution center, driving a forklift. And, I think these guys, they get thrown on the shelf after they're, and then separation and divorce and these things. And, it's a horrible thing for guys, and having gone through it. And, so now I'm down in North Carolina by myself. I'm journaling, I'm writing. And for me, I stumble, it's been one of these like 800-pound gorillas in the room, my adoption story,
Yeah.
and the book is basically my adoption story. That's what it comes down to, and it's like a lot of these things, adoptees talk about a lot of these things out in, social media. And there's this sense of like stolen identity. There's this sense of, loss of control, loss of sense of belonging, and Steve Jobs, when it was adopted, a lot of people don't necessarily know that.
Oh,
And, both sides of his character, if you really look at it, are classic for, the adoptee mindset. It's this like, hyper driven, hyper vigilant, always trying to prove themselves type of guy, but also this like, you know, difficult to work with, difficult to, he wasn't
so
the,
do you think that you were difficult to work with in your life?
oh, I would say absolutely. And I think, like I said, for me digging into it, a lot of it is this confusion of identity. It's this who am I? And then, I mean, so my adoption story is that as I evolved the book, it my ex-wife was the one who initiated the search. And like all of a sudden at 40, I find out, I get a call from the state. Like my wife, she wanted me to look for she was pregnant, wanted me to look, she's like, don't you want to find your birth mother? And I'm like, not really. And she's like, but don't you think the kids should know their medical history? I'm like, no, they know me. I'm healthy. I don't have any problems. She's like, but don't you think they should know? I'm like, no. And then she kind of continued. I'm like, no, 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 I don't. And then eventually she's like, well, what if I get the paperwork and sign it? Will you, or if I get the paperwork and fill it out, will you sign it? So I'm like, sure. So I signed the paperwork. And then 3 years later, they call and they say, here's your mother, here's her name, here's her address, here's her phone number, and it's like, boom. You're like, really? You know, and then I get this, transcript in the mail a little while later. And this was the real bombshell. I grew up this Italian kid, Erie, Pennsylvania, 100% Italian, 120% Italian, and I get this transcript, and the judge says, is your name Joyce Tice? Yes, sir. Are you the mother of this Negro child? I'm like, Negro child? Who's the Negro child? What, did she have another baby or something? And it's like, and it turns out my father was mixed race. My father was raised, considered
Oh,
himself African American. His family was 100%. I got an uncle who was a Black Panther in the 60s.
oh,
I got another uncle who was drafted by the Vikings and then eventually, was drafted into Vietnam and came back. So now, and it turns out my birth mother, she came in on the Mayflower. So I go from this Italian kid, Erie, Pennsylvania, blue collar, working class. Next thing I know, I'm this pilgrim, Thanksgiving Mayflower descendant, and I'm also a descendant from a slave ship. And it's like, how do you put this all together into an identity? I've got the immigrant ship with my
so it
grandfather. You got
changes
the
who you think you are thanks to that search. And that's what's happened, it sounds like. Everything you
Absolutely.
thought you were is not who you are.
Right. But then also, as this steel door is opened, you're like, no shit. Like I could have told you that. There's this, like I said, once that, I said, and I'm on the other side of adoptees call this phenomenon, coming out of the fog, you know. And I think a lot of children, I mean, I've since learned, a lot of adoptees really struggle with identity. If they, I fairly well assimilated with my family. I was lucky, I was blessed, I was chosen, all these great things that you need to be grateful for. And I was. Um, but then also you look back and you're like, you know what? I didn't feel totally comfortable in this role as an adopted child. I didn't, like I had other facets, I had other identities that were kind of, hidden underneath the veil of shame and guilt. So then fast forward, so now I'm like, okay, so I meet my birth mother, I meet my birth father's family, and I'm like, all right, I get this. I'm cool with it. Like it all makes sense to me. All those tendencies I had, all those whatever stereotypes, I ran track. I had, a Brillo pad hairdo and, I mean, I had a little afro hair. And so you start to put these pieces together. So I'm like, I tell my sister, I'm like, Lisa, I'm going to tell mom and dad about this. She's like, oh no, Jack, that is not a good idea. I'm like, Lisa, mom and dad need to know it. I think the nuns lied to them. They didn't tell them the truth back then. And so she's like, I don't know, they're both old, they're not going to take this. So I go and I tell my parents, and there's like, 2 bottles of wine for liquid courage. For my mother's like, oh, Jack, I can't believe it's difficult on all sides of the fence. So then my father, through his tears and red face and shaking, he's like, Jack, we already knew all that. I'm like, knew what? I didn't even tell you anything. And he goes, everyone in the family had to know before we brought you home. I'm like, no, what? That my father was black? And he goes, yeah. So it's like my parents knew all along for 52 years. They knew that I was mixed race from the start. They knew my story and just chose not to tell me.
So do you feel
So
that
there's
that led to the separation and divorce is finding who you really were?
I think it contributed. I can't deny that there was definitely a contribution to it, but just that. And I've talked to many adoptees since then, and they're like, "Oh yeah, same thing happened to me. Oh yeah, when I found out, it just it resets everything. It makes you, you talk about, imposter syndrome, or just like I said, resetting your your whole view on life. You're like, who would I have been? And in the book I refer to that child who was given away, or that child that I was before I was given away. That child who bonded with his mother for 9 months in the womb, who
Wow.
was, she was your soil. She was, you heard her voice, and there's science that proves all this. I felt her heartbeat, her breath, her vibe, her rhythm, her flow. It's just, this is your person, and typically you're born and you cuddle and you nurse, you
Yep.
know and there's a lot of talk about that early trauma of birth relinquishment. And now this child's like put under the heat lamp, sent to an orphanage, sent to a foster home, sent to another family, sent to another family, and they never really have that opportunity to really bond with their mother. I know, if you think about it, you wouldn't do that to a dog. You wouldn't buy a dog that you took immediately from their mother, yet
No.
we do it routinely with adopted kids, and especially during those
Wow.
days. And it's deep, and I know we don't have time for all this.
No, no, I
Get
like
in-
this as a bit first thing. I definitely think that you could build a huge community with what you're doing with adoptees. It's a great way to really build a huge community of your story. Your story is just powerful. But I didn't expect to talk even this long, because we have short interviews because we do many different guests. But where's the best place people can find information on your book and learn more about you? Where can they go?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest thing is Amazon.com, and the book is called Recycled. That was my grandfather's word, old Italian guy. He called all those kids who weren't like real kids, who weren't like kids that were like half kids or step kids or whatever. He told me one time, he's like, Jack, I think we got more recycled kids than we got our own now. So I write that as like, and an honor, I
Wow.
titled it for him as like an honor to him. But the subtitle is, it's recycled, a reluctant search for true self through nurture, nature, and free will. So I get into all of that, who was my natural self? Who was my nurtured self? What choice did I have in the free will decisions I
Mm,
made? And trying to put that all together into one identity.
that's powerful.
It's a freaking trip of a book,
I mean,
it'll,
it's something that you just never think about. And you think about these identity crises we go through or challenges like a divorce, like separation. You're mentioning adoption, but there's other types of things that literally change who you are. You went through that separation, divorce, but ultimately you went through a lot of other stuff that needed work out too, like losing a loved one during a time of all those different trials. It shapes you as a human being for the rest of your life's next quarter century or longer of life. And people
Mhm.
just don't get that because we constantly grow and change. Appreciate
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
doctor.
Thank you so
All
much.
right.
I appreciate you.
All right. Listening and watching the Neil Haley show, and we'll be back in just a moment.